Think about your life for a second. It's really just a collection of stories, isn't it? The stories we tell ourselves, the stories other people tell about us, they literally shape our reality. But what if you could grab the pen and rewrite the parts you don't like? Well, that's the incredibly powerful idea we're diving into today, all through the lens of narrative therapy. So let me ask you something. What's the story of you? Is it a drama, a success story, maybe a bit of a tragedy? But here's the kicker. Who actually wrote it? Are you sure it was you? Because the thing is, a lot of the time, we have these ghostwriters in our lives that we don't even realize are there. So for this first part, let's pull back the curtain and find out who they are. To get this, you got to understand this huge shift in how we think about the mind. For the longest time, we had the modernist view. It basically treated the mind like a car engine. If something's wrong, it's broken. And a therapist's job is to pop the hood and fix the faulty part. But the constructivist view, totally different. It sees the mind as a story-making machine, a meaning maker. It's not about fixing what's broken, it's about understanding the story being told. So who are these ghostwriters? Well, one of the biggest ones is what's called dominant discourses. Just think of these as society's unwritten rulebooks. They're these powerful, often invisible stories that tell us how we should be. What a good person does, what success looks like, how a normal family behaves. And they often write that first draft of our life story before we even get a chance to say anything. And the tool that these discourses use, it's language. This is so key. The words we use, they don't just describe the world around us, they actively build it. So for example, when we label a certain behavior as pathological, we're not just putting a name on it. We're actually constructing a reality where that person is seen as fundamentally sick. We're casting them in a role they didn't choose. Which leads to this absolutely liberating idea, anti-essentialism. If our reality is built with words, can we use different words to build a different one? Yes. This idea says there's no single true you locked away somewhere. Your identity is multi-storied. You're not just one story, you're like a whole library full of different possible versions of yourself. Okay, so we've kind of unpacked the problem. We see the ghostwriters, we see how language works, but how do we actually do something about it? How do we take the pen back? Well, that's what Section 2 is all about, how to re-author your life. And this is where narrative therapy really shines. It was developed by these two pioneers, Michael White and David Epstein, and it's not just some abstract theory. It's a practical toolkit. It is literally designed to help you go from being just a character in a story someone else wrote to becoming the main author of your own life. Now, if you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this quote. The person is not the problem is the problem. It sounds so simple, right? But this one little shift in perspective is completely revolutionary. It's the key that unlocks everything else. This core technique is called externalization. So instead of saying, I am an anxious person, making anxiety a core part of who you are, you'd say something like, I'm a person who is struggling against anxiety right now. Can you feel the difference? Suddenly, anxiety isn't you. It's his other character in your story. Maybe it's a bully or a shadow or a fog. And if it's just a character, well, you can start to understand it and eventually you can write it out of the script. Now, this all sounds pretty amazing, but like any powerful tool, it's not a magic wand. This approach has some incredible strengths, for sure, but there are also some really important critiques we need to look at. So let's get into the pros and cons of the rewrite. The upsides? They are huge. First, it fosters agency. It literally puts the pen back in your hand, making you the expert on your own life. Second, it just crushes shame. By externalizing the problem, like we just talked about, it's no longer some deep personal flaw. And third, it's fantastic for cultural competence because it respects that everyone's story is unique and valid, instead of forcing one right way to live. But hey, any good author knows you have to listen to the critics, right? It helps make the story stronger. So let's take an honest look at some of the challenges and limitations that get brought up. So here are the main ones. The whole idea of relativism, it raises a tough question. If every story is equally valid, how do we deal with situations of real objective harm? Then there's the critique that it can be a bit too intellectual. It might not click with someone who just wants concrete behavioral steps to feel better. There's also the risk of biological oversight. You can't just talk your way out of some very real brain chemistry issues or deep trauma that's stored in the body. And finally, even with the best intentions, a therapist can still subtly influence the new story a person writes. So, with all that on the table, where does this leave us? Let's turn the page and talk about your next chapter. Look, the bottom line is this: narrative therapy is not about ignoring reality or just making up a fantasy life. Not at all. It's about a fundamental shift in your stance towards your own life. It's about recognizing that while you don't control everything that happens to you, you have incredible power over the meaning you make from it. You get to choose the story you build from here. It's that jump from passive character to active author. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final thought to really chew on. If you could pick up the pen right this very second, what is the one sentence you would rewrite in your own story?